looking back to my youth and my younger years up until now, it's this laundry list of mostly things that I thought I should be giving up anyway. From soda to chocolate to candy to Netflix to judging others to carbohydrates to Facebook. I've been a vegan, I've been a pescatarian, I've been just about anything and everything for Lent. All under this guise that it was somehow spiritually good for me. I think there's this temptation to look at this time of Lent, this period when we have this bound period when we are encouraged to fast and to pray, to focus, to give something up. I think there's a temptation to use it like 40 days to self-betterment, to use Lent like a fad diet or a self-help book, as a way to jumpstart that habit that we wished we had cultivated all along, or to do those things that we wished we had done, or to put down those things that we think really ultimately aren't that good for us. I think to look at Lent that way is to miss the point in some pretty fundamental ways. And I don't think we have to look very much further than our reading from Isaiah to hear that message. Is not this the fast that I choose? To loose the bonds of injustice, to undo the thongs of the yoke, to let the oppressed go free, and to break every yoke? Is it not to share your bread with the hungry and bring the homeless poor into your house? When you see the naked, to cover them, and not to hide yourself from your own kin. Then your light shall break forth like the dawn, and your healing shall spring up quickly. This is the fast that I choose. What God asks of the people of Israel through the prophet Isaiah is not that they would give things up. The point wasn't that they would forego something that they wanted or needed or had, thinking that just that very act of giving up, of self-denial, would bring about any kind of spiritual change or fulfillment. The fast that God asks of the people of Israel and that we hear echoed in Matthew's gospel is a fast in which the people of Israel, the disciples of Jesus, are invited not necessarily just to turn away from something, but turn towards something. God invites them to turn towards God, to put down those things that get in the way, the distractions, the temptations, the things that easily draw our focus away from the things that matter most, and to look towards God. But not to stop there, to look towards their neighbors as well, to look not only at their own needs, wants, desires, but to look at the needs and desires of their neighbors, to see the suffering and to stand with them, to see the wounded and to heal them, to see the hungry and to feed them, to see the naked and to clothe them. God asks the people of Israel, Jesus asks his disciples, and God asks us to turn towards those places of need. And I think it's easy to want to turn off, to tune out, to focus on our own little struggles, our own practices of piety, how difficult it's going to be not to eat chocolate for 40 days. But that giving up can be a distraction. It can be a distraction from those things that matter most. I think God, through these scriptures, through this time of Lent, is inviting us to turn our attention onto those things that matter most. I think of so many things going on in the world today, the conflict in the Ukraine being, I think, in the forefront of so many of our minds. Think of the continuing deep divisions in our country, this uncertain period where we're still finding ourselves in the midst of a pandemic 2 years later, uncertain of exactly how to bring ourselves out of it, how to be in any public space. And looking in our own communities, there continues to be great need. Folks who are experiencing hunger, unemployment, folks in need of clothes, of shelter, vast vast economic income gaps, gaps in opportunities for quality education. I think those are the things that God invites us to look to turn towards. During this season of Lent, we're invited, yes, to fast, yes, to take on disciplines, but only insofar as they help us focus in on those places where God is already at work, where God is inviting us to meet God and encounter our neighbors. Isaiah ends his passage with his invitation to be repairers of the breach, restorers of streets to live in. I think that's the goal of a Holy Lent. That's what we're doing when we gather today, to face into, to turn towards our own mortality, our own limitations, our own need for God's grace and God's love. We're focusing not on those things that ultimately don't matter, but asked to confront those things that matter most. What it looks like to live a good life in the face of our own mortality and our own limits. And so on this Ash Wednesday, as we enter into these 40 days of Lent, I hope that we can turn towards God in prayer, in focus, to listen for how God's love is speaking to us. And I hope that we can turn towards our neighbors, to those in our own community and those who suffer around the world. We may stand in solidarity with them, that our hearts will break with those whose hearts are broken. We will seek healing for those who suffer. All of the things that are laid out in this passage from Isaiah and so many more. On this day, I invite us to the observance of a holy Lent, and to remember that from dust we were created, and to dust we shall return.